There's a type of person most people avoid without knowing why. Not because they're rude, not because they're cruel, but because something in their energy says, don't come closer. I've survived things you can't see, and I learned to do it alone. The trauma-born loner doesn't wear their pain like a badge. They wear it like armor, so seamlessly integrated into their personality that even they forget it's there. They'll tell you they're fine, they prefer solitude, they don't need anyone, and on the surface it looks like strength, like wisdom, like someone who figured out what most people never do, that you can't rely on anyone but yourself. But Carl Jung saw what most people miss. That kind of self-sufficiency isn't freedom. It's a survival response that calcified into identity. And the dangerous part, most people who live this way never escape it, not because they can't, but because they don't realize they're trapped until the cage has already consumed them. Here's what Jung observed that terrifies most psychologists. Trauma-born isolation doesn't just change your behavior. It rewires your nervous system to perceive connection as threat. And once that happens, once your body equates vulnerability with annihilation, the path back to human connection becomes so narrow that very few people ever find it. This video isn't about celebrating loners. It's about understanding what happens to the rare few who were forced into isolation so early, so completely, that they forgot what it feels like to be safe with another human being. And more importantly, what it actually takes to survive that pattern without losing yourself completely. If your first instinct right now is to close this video, that's the response I'm talking about. Stay 5 more minutes, because what I'm about to show you isn't an attack, it's a map, and you might be closer to the edge than you think. Let me be surgical about what creates a trauma-born loner, because it's not what most people think. It's not one catastrophic event, it's 1,000 small moments where you learned. Showing up emotionally gets you hurt. Needing someone makes you a burden. Asking for help is a betrayal of your own strength. Maybe you were 5 years old, crying, and the person who was supposed to comfort you looked at you with disgust. Maybe you were 12 and you told someone you were struggling, and they used it against you later. Maybe you were 17 and the person you trusted most walked away the moment you stopped performing stability. Whatever it was, your nervous system logged it, and after enough repetitions, it didn't wait for the betrayal anymore. It started preempting it. It built the walls before anyone could get close enough to leave. And here's what nobody tells you, that's not a personality trait, that's a neurobiological adaptation. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that detects threat, started firing every time someone showed interest, every time someone said, let's talk, every time someone tried to help. Not because you're broken, but because your system learned, intimacy precedes abandonment, vulnerability precedes punishment, connection precedes collapse. So you stopped connecting, and at first it felt like relief. Like finally you could breathe without someone else's expectations pressing down on you. Finally you could exist without performing, without managing, without pretending. But isolation, when it becomes your only safety, doesn't stay neutral. It starts small. You skip a few social events, you stop responding to messages. You tell yourself you'll reconnect when you're ready, but ready never comes. Because every day you spend alone, your tolerance for connection shrinks, and every boundary you set to protect yourself becomes a wall you can't climb back over. Jung called this the trauma response that fossilizes into identity. You don't just isolate to recover. You start believing isolation is your truth, that self-sufficiency is enlightenment, that people who need others are weak, naive, or codependent. And the most dangerous part, society rewards this. People call you strong, independent, low maintenance. They don't see the truth. You're not low maintenance because you're zen. You're low maintenance because you learned that having needs gets you abandoned. There's a moment, and if you're honest, you remember it, where someone tried to reach you and your body physically recoiled, not because they were unsafe, but because your nervous system couldn't tell the difference anymore between care and control, between support and invasion, between I see you and I own you. That moment, that's when you know you've crossed the line from chosen solitude into trauma-born isolation, and very few people make it back. Here's the part no one wants to admit. Long-term isolation doesn't preserve you, it erodes you. At first you think you're healing, you're finally away from the chaos, the demands, the disappointment, and for 6 months, maybe a year it works. You sleep better, you think clearer. You stop feeling that low-grade anxiety that comes from constantly anticipating other people's needs. But around month 18, something shifts. You stop noticing how many days pass without a real conversation, how many times you rehearse arguments with people who aren't there, how your thoughts start looping, the same grievances, the same justifications, the same memories replaying with no one to interrupt the pattern. Your world shrinks, but it happens so gradually you don't register it. You used to have 5 people you'd call, now you have 2, then 1, then none, and you tell yourself it's preference, it's boundaries, it's growth. But here's what's actually happening. Your brain is adapting to solitude by becoming more sensitized to threat. Research on social isolation shows that prolonged disconnection increases hypervigilance, not peace. Your nervous system starts treating every interaction like a potential attack because it has no recent data proving otherwise. You know that feeling when someone texts you, "Hey, can we talk?" and your chest tightens before you even know what it's about. That's not intuition. That's your nervous system in chronic defense mode. Here's the moment you know it's gone too far. You're sitting alone on a Saturday night again and you feel relief, not contentment, relief, like you dodged something dangerous, like you survived another week without having to explain yourself, perform, or pretend you're fine. And the worst part, you've started to enjoy it, the control, the predictability, the fact that no one can disappoint you because no one can reach you. Jung warned about this. He called it psychic inflation, when your inner world becomes so dominant that external reality stops mattering. You lose your ability to calibrate, to reality test, to notice when your perceptions have drifted so far from truth that you're no longer seeing people as they are. You're seeing projections, threats, proof that you were right to stay away. And because there's no one there to challenge your narrative, it hardens. The story becomes, everyone leaves, everyone disappoints, everyone proves I'm better off alone, and you collect evidence for that story while ignoring every piece of data that contradicts it. That's not healing, that's calcification, and by the time you notice, the cost isn't just loneliness, it's the loss of your ability to be moved, to be surprised, to let someone in and discover they're not who you expected. You become unreachable, not by choice but by design, and the tragedy is you call it strength. So what does it actually take to survive this pattern? Not to cope with it, not to tolerate it, but to integrate it without letting it consume you. It requires something most people never develop, the ability to feel the terror of connection and choose it anyway. Not because you're healed, not because you trust again, but because you've realized that isolation, no matter how safe it feels, is slowly killing the part of you that can still grow. Let me tell you what the 1% do that everyone else refuses. They stop waiting for the right person. They stop screening for perfect safety. They stop demanding that someone prove they're trustworthy before they risk an inch of vulnerability, because they've realized you can't build trust without risk, and you can't heal a nervous system that equates connection with danger by avoiding connection. The 1% do something that looks insane from the outside. They practice micro-vulnerability with people who haven't earned it yet, not trauma dumping, not oversharing, just small, deliberate acts of letting someone see them without the armor. Like admitting they're tired instead of saying, "I'm fine." Like asking for help with something small instead of doing everything alone. Like saying, "I'm struggling," instead of performing competence. And here's what happens that they didn't expect. Their nervous system learns that vulnerability doesn't equal death, that being seen doesn't lead to betrayal, that needing someone doesn't make them weak. Not every time, not with every person, but enough times that the data starts to outweigh the trauma. Jung called this the integration of opposites. You're not abandoning your self-sufficiency. You're adding the capacity for interdependence. You're not rejecting your boundaries. You're learning when to lower them consciously instead of hiding behind them compulsively. But here's the brutal truth most people never get here. Because the moment connection starts to feel safe, the moment someone shows up consistently, the moment vulnerability doesn't end in disaster, their trauma response panics. It says this is the setup. This is how it starts before it all falls apart. Get out now while you can still control it. And they sabotage it, they pull back, they test the person. They create conflict to prove their original narrative was right. They'd rather be alone and correct than connected and uncertain. The 1% tolerate that discomfort. They feel the urge to run and they stay 5 more minutes. They notice the sabotage pattern and they interrupt it. They catch themselves creating distance and they close it before it becomes permanent. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough times that the new pattern starts to overwrite the old one. And slowly, painfully, incrementally, they rewire, not back to who they were before the trauma, but into someone who can hold both, the memory of betrayal and the possibility of trust, the need for solitude and the capacity for intimacy, the strength of independence and the courage of interdependence. That's what survival looks like, not invincibility, but integration, and very few people have the tolerance for discomfort that requires. Now let's talk about what you don't want to hear, because if you're a trauma-born loner, there's a shadow operating beneath your isolation that you've been pretending doesn't exist. And if you can't admit it, you're not healing. you're just becoming more sophisticated at hiding. You don't just prefer solitude, you've started to believe you're evolved beyond needing people. You look at relationships and see codependency. You look at friendships and see performance. You look at vulnerability and see weakness. And when someone tries to get close to you, you don't just protect yourself. You judge them. You think they're too needy, too emotional, too much. Here's the truth you're avoiding. That's not discernment, that's contempt. And contempt is just fear with a superiority complex. You're not above connection, you're terrified of it. And until you can admit that your boundaries might be walls and your standards might be avoidance, you're not integrated. You're just isolated with a better story. There were moments when someone reached for you and you went cold, not because you needed space, but because you wanted them to feel what you felt. You wanted them to experience the powerlessness of reaching for someone who won't reach back. That's not protection, that's punishment. And you knew it in the moment. You felt them pull away, you saw the hurt, and part of you, the part you don't talk about, felt satisfied, because for once you weren't the one left behind. That's the shadow, the part that learned, if I stay unreachable, I stay in control. If I withhold, I never lose. If I disappear first, I never get abandoned. But here's what you're not seeing. That's not power. That's just replaying your trauma with you in the driver's seat. You become the person who hurt you, and you've convinced yourself it's self-care. You expect people to understand your wounds without you explaining them, to accommodate your patterns without you communicating them, to stay patient while you shut down, disappear, and return on your timeline. You want connection on your terms only, no mess, no demands, no reciprocity, just unconditional acceptance of your unavailability. And when people can't meet that impossible standard, when they get tired of being shut out, when they stop reaching, when they finally walk away, you use it as proof. See, everyone leaves, I was right all along. But they're not leaving because they don't care. They're leaving because you made it impossible to stay. You've built a trap where anyone who loves you will eventually fail your test, and then you get to be right about people while staying alone forever. That's not wisdom, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy you're calling boundaries. You've made your self-sufficiency into a performance, a badge, a story you tell yourself about how strong you are, how little you need, how far you've come. But underneath, you're waiting for someone to see through it, to notice you're struggling, to prove you wrong about people, to fight for you when you push them away. And when no one does, when they take you at your word that you don't need them, you're devastated, betrayed, alone all over again. But here's the cruelest irony. The more you perform independence, the less people see your pain. So you stay trapped in the isolation you're trying to escape, waiting for rescue while refusing to let anyone close enough to help. That's not strength, that's suffering disguised as sovereignty. If you can't see yourself in at least two of these, you're lying. And if you're defending yourself right now instead of sitting with the discomfort, that's the confirmation. Jung said what you refuse to integrate, you're controlled by. And your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that's still trying to survive using strategies that no longer work. The 1% who survive this, they don't deny their shadow, they name it, they own it. They stop pretending isolation is enlightenment and start grieving what it actually cost them. That's the work, and it's brutal, but it's the only way through. So how do you actually survive this without losing yourself? How do you move from trauma-born isolation to conscious solitude? First, stop calling it preference. Stop romanticizing it as strength. Sit with the truth. You didn't choose this. You survived into it, and survival strategies that once protected you are now limiting you. Grieve that, not what people did to you. You've grieved that. Grieve what isolation cost you, the intimacy you sabotaged, the people you pushed away, the moments you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, the years you spent waiting to feel safe enough to try again. You can't heal what you won't mourn, and you can't move forward while pretending the cost was worth it. Second, practice micro-vulnerability, and I mean micro, not confession, not trauma narrative, just small, daily acts of being human in front of someone. Say you're tired, not fine, tired. Ask someone to help you with something small, let them succeed at it. Admit you don't know something instead of performing competence. Share one real thing you're thinking instead of the edited version. Your nervous system won't believe connection is safe through thinking. It has to experience it over and over in small doses until the data outweighs the fear. Third, stay when your body screams to leave. Someone will say something that reminds you of the past. Your instinct will be to shut down, ghost, disappear. Don't. Stay 5 minutes longer than comfortable. Breathe through the activation. Let yourself feel the fear without acting on it. Say out loud, I'm feeling triggered right now, but I'm staying. That's the rewiring, not avoiding the trigger, but teaching your nervous system, I can feel threat and choose differently. Fourth, choose people who have done their own shadow work, not people who need you to be fixed, not people who romanticize your pain, but people who have looked at their own darkness and can hold space for yours without trying to save you from it. Those people are rare, but they exist, and they're the only ones worth the risk. Fifth, accept that healing isn't linear. Some weeks you'll feel open, some weeks you'll want to burn every bridge and disappear. Both are valid. The goal isn't to never isolate, it's to choose it consciously instead of defaulting to it compulsively. To say, I need solitude today, not I need to disappear forever. And finally, stop waiting to be healed before you connect. That's the trap. You don't get healed in isolation and then risk connection. You heal through connection. That's the paradox, that's the terror, and that's the only way through. Jung said, no matter how isolated you are and how lonely you feel, if you do your work truly and conscientiously, unknown friends will come and seek you. But you have to do the work, not wait for rescue, not perform independence, but actually, vulnerably, terrifyingly show up as someone who's still learning how to be close to people without losing themselves. That's what the 1% do, and it's the hardest thing you'll ever attempt, but it's also the only thing that will set you free. Here's what separates the people who survive from the people who stay trapped. The ones who survive learn the difference between solitude and isolation, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Chosen solitude feels like coming home, like rest, like filling your own cup. You're alone and you're whole, you're quiet and you're at peace. You can think, create, breathe, and when you're ready, you can return to people without resentment. Trauma-born isolation feels like hiding, like exile, like safety only exists when no one can find you. You're alone, but you're not at rest, you're vigilant, waiting, convinced that if someone gets too close, everything will collapse. One restores you, the other depletes you. One makes you more yourself, the other makes you smaller. One is a choice, the other is a compulsion you've learned to defend. And if you're honest, if you let yourself feel it instead of thinking about it, you know which one you've been living in. You know the difference between I need time alone and I can't let anyone see me like this. Between I value my solitude and I'm terrified of what will happen if I let someone in. Between I'm recharging and I'm hiding. Jung called this the difference between individuation and alienation. Individuation is becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts that need people. Alienation is cutting yourself off and calling it enlightenment. The 1% stop defending their isolation and start questioning it. They stop treating every boundary like sacred ground and start asking, is this protection or is this prison? And when they're brave enough to answer honestly, everything changes. Because survival isn't about staying safe, it's about becoming whole. And you can't become whole while half of you is locked behind walls you built to survive a war that's already over. Very few people fully integrate trauma-born isolation, not because they're weak, but because most never realize they're trapped. They think their independence is identity, their self-sufficiency is strength, their isolation is wisdom, and by the time they notice the cost, they've already adapted so completely that change feels like death. But you're not them. If you're still here, you're already in the 1%, because the first step isn't action, it's awareness. It's the willingness to sit with the possibility that what you've called strength might be survival, that what you've called healing might still be hiding. Jung spent his life showing people, we don't become whole by staying safe. We become whole by risking the thing that once destroyed us and discovering we can survive it now, not because the danger is gone, but because we're no longer the person who had to isolate to stay alive. You survived the trauma, now you have to survive the healing, and that's the part that most people never attempt. But it's also the only part that will set you free.